Welcome, everyone, to our launch of the FTM Newsletter Online. My name is Aaron DeVore, and I am the founder of the Chair in Transgender Studies, the Transgender Archives, and the Moving Trans History Forward conferences. I'm broadcasting today from the University of Victoria. We acknowledge with respect the Wakangan people on whose traditional territory the University of Victoria stands, and the Songhees, the Esquimalt, and Wasanish peoples, whose historical relationships with the land continue to this day. The Chair in Transgender Studies is the world's first chair in Transgender Studies, and we work to provide inspiration and hope to trans people and our allies everywhere. We contribute to the development and the communication of accurate, research-based, real-world knowledge about trans plus people that can be used to better build policies and laws and to drive social change. We help to build strong and resilient trans plus social and cultural communities and individual well-being by facilitating arts, cultural, and social activities. And in all that we do, we're committed to applying an intersectional lens in our work to advance reconciliation, racial justice, equity, and inclusion for all. In addition to events like today's, we offer a lot of other services and activities, including, as you saw, the world's largest transgender archives, the international and interdisciplinary biennial Moving Trans History Forward conferences, a variety of scholarships programs for UVic students and fellowships programs for visitors, and a whole range of arts and cultural events. So look for us on the web. We're active on social media, and we have several web pages. Sign up for our newsletter. This event is focused on the FTM newsletter, which we have digitized the entire run of 67 issues of the FTM newsletter that was published between 1987 and 2008. So all of that is now available online, free of charge. You can search and flip through the pages and read those newsletters. However, we have redacted a small amount of information that could identify people who were not public figures at the time. So we're trying to protect people's personal privacy. But other than that, it's all there, and it's all there for you to see. So take a look at this short video about the FTM newsletter. We have a panel of distinguished people who have been involved with the FTM newsletter that we're going to be talking with. I'm going to be asking them some questions and chatting with them, and then you will have an opportunity to ask them questions afterwards. So let me first introduce our panelists. First of all, Jameson Green. Jameson Green has a PhD in equalities law and is a writer and a policy consultant. He's the author of Becoming a Visible Man, and past president of the World Professional Association for Transgender Health, known as WPATH. He lives in Vancouver, Washington. FTM was founded, the organization that put out the newsletter was founded in 1986 by Lou Sullivan. And before Sullivan's death in 1991, he passed the leadership of the organization to Jameson, who led the organization from 1991 to 1999. Welcome, Jameson. I could go on quite a bit longer. Jameson has done far more than I just said in that little brief bio. So I'll just leave it at that for the moment. So Jameson, thank you for joining us. Rupert Raj is another person I could go on about for a long time, and I'm only going to give a short introductory bio here. Rupert, age 70, is a Eurasian Canadian pansexual trans elder who's been an international trans activist in North America and abroad since he transitioned in 1971. He was the founding editor of 3 newsletters: the Gender Review, which ran from 1978 to 1985 and was the first national transsexual newsletter in Canada. Also, Metamorphosis, which ran from 1982 to 1988, which was the first newsletter exclusively for trans men in North America and abroad. And the Gender Networker, which was in 1988 and was for helping professionals. So welcome, Rupert. We're very glad that you could join us. Our third panelist is Max Wolf-Valerio. Max Wolf-Valerio is an iconoclastic poet and writer. He began his medical transition in 1989. He is First Nations, the Kainai Blackfoot Confederacy in Treaty 7 in Alberta, Canada, from his mother's side. His essays appear in many places, and he has been featured in several films. Max, I just saw your most recent film. It was great. And the FTM newsletter was a lifeline for Max in the 1980s. He appeared on the cover of issue number 24 in 1993 and was briefly an assistant editor. Welcome, Max. I'm really glad you could join us. And again, there's lots more I could be saying about Max, but I've only got a few minutes for the intros. And then finally, and absolutely not the least, and again, Kyler, I could say so much more, but I've only got a minute here for each of you. So Kyler Broadus is a Black man of trans experience who has been a pioneer in the movement as an attorney, a longtime activist, a public speaker, an author, a lobbyist, and a professor. Broadus is known worldwide for his work in the LGBT and trans movements, and he subscribed to the FTM newsletter. It was a lifeline. It made him feel connected in a world where it felt like there were very few people like him. So welcome, Kyler. Really glad that you could all be here. So Jameson, we'll start with you. When you took over FTM after Lou's death in 1991, did you have a sense of what Lou's vision was for the future of FTM and the publication, the future of FTM, the publication, and FTM, the organization?
We talked a week before he died. He asked me to come to his house and asked me to take over the newsletter and to help with the group. There was another guy who I haven't named, although he's named in a few places. I think he's named in the Lou's diaries, of course, which are available to the public. But to me, he always expressed that he wanted to remain rather confidential. So I don't name him, but he was supposed to help coordinate the group, and I was just supposed to be a writer. I mean, I was a writer, so he asked me if I would continue the newsletter, and I said sure, no problem, because quarterly, it was small, it was not too big of a deal. But he said, you know, I really am concerned about people being able to get good, reliable information and to have a sense of our context and our history. I don't think he used the word context, but, you know, of our history. He was very interested in history. As you know, he published a book about Jack B. Garland, who lived as a man for most of his life in the San Francisco, but also sailed, I think, was in the wars in the Philippines and stuff like that. I mean, really, really interesting person. There was so much we didn't know, and Lou wanted that particular vision. That was his vision, that the networking group was supposed to. He didn't really have a vision for that he communicated. He just wanted place for people to talk and share knowledge with each other. And the newsletter, again, just to help keep people connected and to to be a vehicle to reach out, because that already was going to a number of countries. And, he just wanted people to be connected and not be lost.
Thank you. So I've got a image that I'd like to put up on the screen of the first issue that came out under your leadership. All right. So this is issue number 15 in 1992. So this is where you started to assert your direction. And how did you fulfill or expand on that vision with your own ideas?
There was a meeting that had already been scheduled after Lou died, and a surprising number of people showed up for that meeting. And people from the local cross-dressing group had come. They had collected money because Lou was very connected with them. And they collected money to help us continue the group and continue publishing the newsletter. We didn't have any money. Lou paid for some things out of his pocket. I paid for some things down the road. I paid for some things out of my pocket. But I tried to encourage people to be engaged and encourage people to participate. And people said right off the bat, because we only met 4 times a year, and people said right off the bat they wanted meetings every month. And that scared me. I mean, I wasn't, I'm not a social worker. I'm not even the greatest host in the world if people come to visit. I mean, I'm a writer. And I just said, you guys, it's our group. It's not my group. I'm not responsible for everything. You can't look to me for everything. If you want something to happen, let's step up and make it happen. Let's talk together about how we do that. And I really wanted to use that vehicle, the newsletter and the group, as a way to grow people's confidence for themselves and to encourage people to take steps to make things happen. And then I sort of grew into a place of responsibility. I was afraid of responsibility in the beginning, but gradually over time, I grew into being able to be responsible and be a better manager of volunteers. I was already a manager at work, and I was very aware that there's a difference between managing people for whom you're responsible for their paycheck. I mean, you have control over whether or not they get a paycheck, and people who are there because of their own personal needs or their own personal desire to contribute. And that I could never, at work or in the group, I could never ask anyone to do anything that I was not willing to do myself.
Thanks, James. Rupert, when Lou started FTM in 1986, you'd already been publishing your own newsletter, Metamorphosis. And
yes,
let's just put that, I want to put that up on the screen just for a moment for those who have never seen that before. Okay, so here's volume 1, number 1. This is the first one, February 1982. I'm sure you remember it, but there's lots of folks who have never seen that before. So what role do you think that your own work played in the development of Lou's FTM newsletter? Your Metamorphosis came first. And did the two of you gain inspiration from one another? And how did you learn from each other and work together? If you could talk about that a little bit.
So perhaps Lou got some inspiration to start his FTM from my Metamorphosis, which began 5 years prior, just the same way that Jude Patton and Joanna Clark's Renaissance newsletter from 1976 inspired me to start my Gender Review, the factual journal, in 1978. So, of course, in those days, we all tended to exchange newsletters and share stories and personal ads and book reviews and such throughout North America and even to some degree the UK, Australia, New Zealand, and because we didn't have internet in those days. So definitely Lou and I did did have a friendship. We never got to meet, unfortunately, because I was working a low-income job, and same as Lou. And I lived in Toronto, and he lived in San Francisco, and travel was pretty expensive in those days. So we wrote copious letters, which are both in his papers at the San Francisco Gay and Lesbian Historical Society and Museum, and also in my bonds at the archives in Toronto, and also in the Transgender Archives and in the Digital Transgender Archive.
So your communication back and forth was handwritten letters. Were there phone calls as well?
Handwritten or typed. I think we only called once or twice because, as you know, phone calls were pretty expensive in those days.
Yes, yes. Long distance phone calls is a whole other thing then than it is.
And so, of course, Lou probably paid out of his own pocket to some degree, as I did, because the newsletter subscriptions were not enough to cover all the costs of photocopying, postage, and then all the counseling, the free peer counseling that Lou did and I did, telephone calls, letter writing, all of that was all voluntary. We didn't get paid for any of that. It came out of our own pocket.
Yeah,
so definitely we did influence each other in terms of our newsletters.
So this last piece that you brought in, I think is important, that you weren't just publishing newsletters. You were building community. You were helping people find their pathways, because there was a lot of other stuff that happened around the newsletters. Jameson's nodding. You were doing that too, in terms of, helping people find their way and giving them advice and making connections. And so the newsletters were the core of that, but it wasn't just publishing a newsletter.
Yeah. And most of my subscribers were Americans, with a few Canadians, because of course the US has a larger population, and a few from the UK, Australia, New Zealand, and some other countries. So I was able to, and Lou as well, to with our subscribers' permission, to put people in contact with each other. So I could put someone in St. Louis in contact with someone else in St. Louis, because they didn't know each other existed, because the AIDS service organizations were not available till a little later on, where people sometimes went for those kinds of connections, or to the gay organizations. But primarily, yes, the newsletters were a lifeline for connecting people, and also connecting people worldwide prior to the internet.
Yeah, thank you, Rupert. Max, I want to bring you in now. So Max, can I say you were a cover boy?
Once, baby. Yeah.
Issue number 24. So here's a younger Max for you, those of you that didn't know him then, 1993. Look at that head of hair, eh?
There's still some. I just got rid of a lot of it. But yeah, definitely more then. There was so much more.
and much darker. All of us, we've gotten gray.
Yeah. Well,
so how did you end up on the cover? What was it like for you to have that level of exposure? Well, how did that affect your life?
That came out of a period in my life where I had done the Max movie with Monica Troit in New York City, which was one of the first documentaries where an individual, or maybe the first, where an individual trans man, a short documentary, was featured. And we made it in 1991. It came out in 93. I think that was 1994. So it was really part of the wave of publicity that came out of that film. So I was also in the San Francisco Weekly on the cover. They had something that said "From Dyke to Dude." That was, well, no, I wasn't on the cover, but the story, the byline was there. And if you looked inside, it was "From Dyke to Dude." And one of my memories is working at a market research firm and walking in. No, of course I wasn't, I was stealth, or nobody knew. And walking into the break room and seeing people reading that story. So it's interesting. But yeah, so it was part of that. I think, the newsletter was a lifeline for myself and for so many people. I contacted Lou because of a tiny little ad I saw on our backs, in the back pages, and it said information for the female to male cross-dresser and transsexual. And I was like, what is that? Oh my God. Does that, there might be people, I might be one of those, but and I was very scared, very trepidatious. I'd never really vaguely heard of such a thing. I kind of knew something about it, but not that much. It wasn't nothing like now. I mean, things are so different now. I don't think we could even have imagined how different things would be in this time period, because, and it's all we have is that little newsletter. And I wrote him I think I wrote him a letter, and he wrote me back, and he invited me to call him, and he sent me the newsletter. And I opened it up. It was June 1988, that newsletter. And the first thing I saw was genetic males have big feet. And I was like, oh my God, they're writing about this thing. Oh my God. Wow. And I kind of would close it and I put it under my bed. Didn't tell anybody I was reading this thing. And I saw Rupert's picture actually. And I was quite impressed. I was like, wow, he looks like a guy. Wow. Okay. I had no idea this was possible. So really for me, it was just this amazing thing. It was a lifeline. There was nothing else like that out there. I mean, Rupert had his newsletter, obviously, but I was in San Francisco. So it was just this incredible thing. And I went to, I talked to Lou on the phone, and then I went to one of the first meetings. My first meeting, I think, was in September 1988. I was terrified. And I saw James there. James at the time going by James, or
I still go by James.
Yeah. Okay.
For my friends.
Yeah. Okay. And so I was quite impressed with everyone, and it was, kind of overwhelming. So that's it. I walked into that room and it was like, my God, they all look like guys, like, how does this even happen? I want to do this. So, so Lou really put out a lifeline. I do want to say, I want to put a nod out to Kevin Horowitz, who passed away in, I believe it was 2015, of a brain tumor. And Kevin was, I believe, the assistant editor early on with Lou.
Yeah, he helped Lou. Yeah.
Yeah, he helped Lou a lot, and then he did some more editing, and he drew some really crazy, quirky cartoons for the newsletter. So he was a real presence at the time, and so I just want to give a shout out to the great beyond, to Kevin. He deserves credit. Yeah.
Thank you for that, Max. That's great.
Thank you, Max. And it's interesting that you went to describing how inspirational it was for you to see Rupert's image in the newsletter and to walk into this room and see all these guys. And then, not that many years later, there you are on the front page and providing that same kind of inspiration to lots of other people. And there you are in the films and so many more things since then. But you've also played that role for others. So it's nice to see that cycle of how it goes around now. And I just want to, for the people listening who are not don't have the same experience as those of us on the panel, you mentioned that you saw an ad on our backs. And I'll just want to say that was a lesbian feminist publication that was pretty popular at the time. And it fits in with the from Dyke to Dude headline.
Right. It was a lesbian sex magazine.
Yeah.
Very controversial. I don't even know if they let it into Canada. Yeah, there were problems getting it into Canada because of the porn laws. Right. That, it gets complicated. That Andrea Dworkin and I think Catherine McKinnon she wasn't able to create these anti-pornography laws in the US because of the First Amendment, but she did it in Canada. So unfortunately, they started doing things like not letting On Our Backs in there. Yeah. But yeah, it was an erotica sex magazine, very, very controversial for its time in the 80s. And really, it was, so that's where Lou had his ad in the back.
And he knew he would find people like you there.
Probably.
And,
Right.
and it was a response to an earlier publication that was called Off Our Backs, which was a
Yes.
response to sexist attitudes that were in play at the time.
Yeah,
Okay,
Off Our Backs was a real hardcore lesbian feminist,
yes. Yeah.
Second wave publication, and they hated On Our Backs.
Yeah, but there's this
Right.
Off Our Backs, On Our Backs, FTM.
All right, there we go. See?
Okay,
Right.
let me bring Kyler into the conversation. So, Kyler, you were a subscriber to the FTM newsletter, and I'm wondering, we've had a few themes already coming up, and if you could talk about what it meant to you in your life to know that this publication was there and to make the connections that it made for you. How did that work for you?
Sure, Aaron. I sort of found it accidentally, like Max. I don't know where. And then I ordered it and talked to Jameson. And back then, we were pre-internet. You had to pay for long distance, as Rupert said, and all of those things. And you got things in brown wrappered envelopes because, people found out, bad things might happen to you. So, and I was in the U.S., so I didn't hear or see about Rupert's publication. I did know about Jude's publication, and that may have been where I found FTM International, the Renaissance magazine. And I was like, wow, while Renaissance was good, the FTM International seemed to spark a more direct hit, if you will, to interest of mine. And then I called Jameson up because it didn't get here fast enough because I didn't live in a metropolitan area. I lived in a rural area called the flyover zone in the United States where nothing counts if you're not on a coast. And so, and I was kind of out. I also call it Brandon Tina country. If people know who Brandon Tina is, the first movie actually made about it, one of the first movies actually made about a trans person that doesn't get any traction now. And I always mention it everywhere I go because we kind of get lost in the sea. And so it wasn't cool, especially where everybody drives around in a pickup truck with a shotgun to be out. But I was out. And but I needed support because I found that I was everyone else's support everywhere if they were out. And once I came out, lots of people came out. But the FTM International became my support because there were no support groups. I couldn't see anybody that looked like me. And then I actually, even with FTM International, although eventually there got to be some race stuff in there, there was nobody of my race. So, for a long time, and it's sad still to hear that, by the way, there are a lot of people that don't come out because they don't see people of their race. And I hear that from young Black men now. And it's like, wow, this is still happening. But I also agree with Max is that most of the things we couldn't even imagine would be here now because we were pre-internet, pre-everything. And it was just like, well, we'll just grow. And you kind of didn't worry about that because you were trying to navigate day-to-day things. And FTM International was really soothing in doing that because I could count on that coming once a month. And then I would get some uplift.
4 times a year. 4 times a year.
Well, 4 times a year. Yeah, my memory's gone, James, whatever it was. But, 4 times a year. And that would at least give you enough sustenance to feed you on, whatever was going on in the rest of the world, because it was FTM International and then in the States to give you enough cross connections and build bridges. And that was actually, one of the first times I met James. Sorry, it's Jameson in public.
No, you can call me James. It's fine. Don't worry.
Yeah, but we're good friends. That it was one of the first times I'd met him via telephone. And I'm like, when are you sending that? And I waited and waited by my mailbox to get it. And the articles were just so on point and gave me something to relate to, even though people weren't physically present, until I could get to a place where I could see people, because travel was expensive, etc., until I could drive somewhere to a conference and meet other trans masculine people, because we had visibility of some trans women on TV with Christine Jurgensen and Renee Richardson, but there was none. And I thought, you're really losing it, dude, out here in the Midwest, because there's nobody like you. So what's wrong with you? So that gave me grounding and foundation and connections across to connect to. And that's the story. So, and I'm forever grateful for Lou starting it and all the people that worked on it. And Jameson, who I know was just overwhelmed with it, because when I called and talked to him, he's like, yeah, I'm working as fast as I can. I remember that conversation and will never forget it, because he was trying to get everything together. But it was overwhelming, because the demand, of course, had increased because the trans masculine presence was growing, and they didn't have any money. And I remember that in the conversation. So,
can I throw in something about the race issue? We always had Black members right from the start. There were Black men attending the support groups right from the very beginning. And some of the articles that in the early issues that I was editor for were written by Black men, but they didn't talk about their Blackness all the time. Very rarely would they talk about their Blackness in print. And they often used pseudonyms also.
Mm-hmm.
It was a very, very different time. And people were very, very frightened.
Well, I'll add to that, Jameson. We still find that today, which is why I actually am a consultant and have to dig Black people out, because the double oppression adds to them. So I'm having to find Black people that are trans experienced that don't want to be out either because of their experiences. So that hasn't changed, quite frankly.
No, you're right.
It's still the same. And that's sad to say, it's still the same. I've just been used to dealing with, I'm not going away. I'm going to fight for my rights. And I don't care what color the people are. You're not going to scare me away from the table. And I'm going to talk no matter what the heck is going on or who the people are. And I grew up in a rural area. So I've had to deal with all sorts of people. So it's not as easy to do that for a lot of people of color.
Yep.
Thank you. James, I'm going to ask you another question. I'm going to do another round, and I'm listening to the conversation. This is an aside. I'm listening to the conversation. Is it James or is it Jameson? And when I first met you, you were even prior to James, but I'm not going to say that one in public unless you invite me to.
That's okay. I don't mind saying that. Jameson was a name I came up with when I was 14.
Yeah.
And I shortened it to Jamie.
Yeah, Jamie is
because it was
how I met you.
Because it was cute, safe, and androgynous.
Right. Yeah. So that was the one I met you with. Was Jamie.
Yeah, and I was still using that, and then I don't know. And then I came to no, Jamie is too cute, safe, and androgynous. I'm going to James for short, but Jameson has always been my legal name, and not always, but it's the name that I use professionally, and it's the name IRS knows me by, that sort of thing.
So I'm just gonna tell you that in the chat, I won't mention any names right now. You can check it later. But someone wrote, "My middle name is James, partially after you, Jameson."
Thank you.
Okay, let me ask you a question more on topic. So you've been involved in all kinds of trans activism over the years. You did health policy. You've been in a bunch of films. You do consulting. You've been doing speaking all over the world. You've got your autobiography, WPATH. So that's a lot, and I know you're not done yet. So I want to bring it back to the FTM organization, FTM Newsletter. How did that organization and your work as the editor of the newsletter inspire or propel these efforts forward? How would your activism have been different, or how did it affect your activism by working with FTM International?
Sure. Well, let me also say that, before he died, when Lou was getting very ill, he asked me to take over some of his typical or his usual speaking engagements that he did at some of the local colleges and universities. And Steve Dane also did the same thing about the same time. I think the two of them talked about that and said, yeah, he'd be okay.
They were
so
right.
they both started referring their speaking engagements to me. And before I even got into all of that, I knew that education is a key to improving our situation. And so, but how to do it was a problem, because we were so objectified and so vilified and so made ridiculous and all these negative things. So how to overcome all of that was a problem. But your question basically is, how did that involvement propel me in that way? It basically made me so clear, because I met more and more people through the group and the newsletter and saw these people are wonderful, amazing people. And let me also say, I could not have done any of this without the support of volunteers within the group. Without, Sky Renfro and Mike Hernandez and Shadow Morton and Dion Manley and Yosenio Lewis and Jeff Dykman, and so many people who stepped up, and even Kit Racklin, who's in the audience here today, who was one of our board members for a while. I mean, without people stepping up and volunteering, none of this could have happened, as far as I'm concerned. I mean, all of the amazing accomplishments that we did as a group, moving the issues forward, the dialogues that we had that allowed us to sort of confirm our feelings, as well as reinforce our concept of the language that we needed to use to talk about who we are and to figure out how to move the issues forward. We were concerned about healthcare. We were concerned about access to care. We were concerned about the people not understanding the treatments we were actually receiving, that we wanted to have, but were they scary? We didn't know. And, so many things. And we kept reaching out through the newsletter, also went to professionals. And so we built relationships with professionals and started some of these dialogues about, how do we educate the medical community? How do we learn more? How can the medical community help us understand better? And, there's so much that we did. Well, just to say, I kept being inspired by the people around me. They were good people who didn't deserve the discrimination and the anguish and the pain that they were experiencing. And I wanted to stop it. I wanted to do whatever I could to stop it. And I also wanted to empower them. I wanted to encourage them to find their power and move forward in their lives. Because I saw also, when I was thinking about what to get a PhD in, I thought about how much people kept pushing me towards psychology, but it can only do clinical stuff. And I didn't want to be a clinical psychologist, but I kept thinking about medical anthropology too, and thinking about how we as a cohort hold ourselves back socially so much because we're afraid of either what's going to happen or we've been slammed down so much that we don't do things. And I saw this as a perennial pattern that I saw among people in our group, especially in the early days. People that had a lot of fear, and that hurt me. It just hurt me. And then at the same time, my relationship ended. I was separated from my children. My heart was broken, and so I had to fill it up with something. And I filled it up with the trans community.
We're all better for it, James. Thank you. Thank you. That was very moving. Rupert, you've worked in Canada, and the FTM newsletter was published in the States. You had your newsletters prior to that and subsequently. What were the unique challenges that trans activists faced in Canada during the time, and how were they different from what was going on in the US? And, was the FTM newsletter, I mean, we know it was useful to you, but what were the comparisons, and what was unique and special about what was going on in Canada?
Well, of course, pre-internet, it was much harder to connect people. And Canada, like the US, is very broad geographically and so disparate. And of course, we had French Canadians in Quebec and New Brunswick, and then of course English Canadians, and so there was not always a connection unless you happen to live in Ontario or Quebec. Of course, the smaller population, Canada was so much smaller than the US. We didn't have the critical mass to sustain trans organizations and trans publications, and to lobby politicians. I lobbied a number of politicians in Ontario and British Columbia, but I didn't have the critical mass behind me, and so we never were able to really move forward. And the trans movement really didn't get going. Really get going till the 90s, and part of that was with the internet. That really helped bring people together. And the other thing is, a lot of trans people, a lot of transsexuals were underemployed. Some were unemployed, as opposed to, let's say, male to female cross-dressers, who often were middle-aged and had good jobs. Not all, but many. So when you don't have the economic wherewithal, like I was working, going to school, and doing all of this stuff, voluntary stuff, as was Lou and many others. Well, in Canada, actually, I was the only trans man, except for Nick Lalonde in Montreal, who was in the 80s with the I think it was the AIDS de Transsexuels, or or the ATM, because there was three trans groups in Montreal in the 80s. So I think he was the only other trans man except when I met you, Aaron, of course, in the 80s, that I knew of that was doing activism, and it was out. Also, I was one of the few trans men that were supporting trans women also in North America. Until later on, a lot of trans men did not support trans women. In the early days, there was that kind of separation, kind of similar to cisgender gay men and cisgender lesbians in the early days. They did come together politically, and then they went apart for a while, socially and politically, and then came back together when the AIDS crisis struck. So there's and of course the transsexual, there was that split between transsexuals and drag queens and female impersonators, and then cisgender gay men, cisgender lesbians, and of course all the trans misogyny that came out of the cisgender radical feminists like Janice Raymond and what's her name, Germaine Greer and others. So I think we shared some challenges with the U.S. and we also had some distinct challenges, mostly because we didn't have the critical mass, and of course funding wasn't available in those early days, 70s and 80s. I mean, now people get honoraria and all of that, and they have gender studies in universities. There was none of that back in the 70s or 80s, not probably till the 90s. So.
Thank you, Rupert. I'll just put in a small pitch, which is that the one and maybe only source of funding in the 70s and 80s was the Erickson Educational Foundation.
Mm-hmm. Yes, correct.
There was that one source that was, not enough to go around for everybody, and not everybody knew about it, but there was that one source. But other than that, absolutely nobody had any money. Okay, I'd like to bring Max back into the conversation. So, Max, you began your medical transition in 1989, and you did a memoir, The Testosterone Files. I remember well when it came out. So how do you think that your transition and publishing the memoir would have been different without the support system that was FTM International? How did that come into play for you? Not just the organization itself, but the wider community that it allowed you to reach out to.
Well, I think I probably never would have written it. Like Jameson, I was inspired at some point. I remember being very inspired by, there's not much out there. This is the 90s, right? There's hardly anything out there. Certainly nothing. Most of the memoirs I think were ghost written. I think, there was hardly anything there was one.
Mario Martino's Emerging.
Mario Martino's,
and Mario
that was the only American one.
And it wasn't his real name either, right? I mean, he couldn't really see his face. That was the one.
And it was ghost written.
There were some coming out in England, but not available really in the US.
Yeah, Dear Sir or Madam. I think that person wrote their own.
Mark Reese was it.
Mm-hmm. So I had been a poet. I am a poet. I just had a poetry book come out. So I was an active poet doing readings in the Bay Area, appeared at the Intersection, worked with bands, had a chapbook out. I was doing that. And that was separate, So I had never considered writing prose, really. I wasn't really into writing prose, but I was so inspired. I remember going to this meeting one time and feeling like, these guys need something. They need, to have a story told. They need to, there's hardly anything out there. And so I thought about what kind of book I wanted to write. I wanted it to be more literary. I wanted it to be multidimensional. I wanted to bring my way of looking at language as a poet into the book to some degree. I mean, my poetry is very different, but anyway, so I was inspired by that. Basically, and the other thing that inspired me was that I had met a woman who lived in Boston, Marie-France Alderman at the time. Marie-France Boiselle is her name, really. But I met her through the Max movie, and she wanted to put me on the cover of her magazine in Boston. So we met, we fell madly in love. I moved out to Boston. She had an agent, and she connected me with her agent, and she really encouraged me to write the book. But I really did feel, bottom line was that inspiration of, we need something. There's hardly anything out there for us. So, and I wanted to write something really positive. I wanted humor to be in it. I didn't want it to be this tragic story. And I wanted to write it a little differently from then, it ends in the surgery and it starts here, and so I make it jump around in time and have flashbacks and so on. It's divided into 3 parts besides the prologue. So I was trying to do something really different, and I hope I succeeded. But now we have more literature out there. So it took a while for it to get published. It was written in the 90s. I got a great deal from William Morrow. That deal went down the drain because it's a long story, but I ended up, my editor left. the editor who had acquired the manuscript, she went to Putnam, and then it went into the hands of this guy named Elmer, who was just god awful. He was a horrible editor, and he wanted to he sent back the book practically rewritten, and he wanted to call it. He called me up and said, I want to call your book. He used to stutter. I want to call your book. I was Anita, one woman's journey to manhood. And I was like, no. We are not calling it I Was Anita. Very TV Guide, as a friend of mine said.
Wow.
And he really dumbed it down. And I said, I told my agent, I'm not going through with this. There's no way. I would rather, never put the book out. So we went back and forth. And so he got fired. And then the whole thing went down. It went into storage. And then Michelle T., who's a marvelous third wave, fourth wave feminist, whatever it is now. Yeah. She was, having me read from the book a lot, in the Queer Arts Festival in the 2000s. She connected me to Seal Press, where it was published in 2006. So anyway, that's the story of the book. But yeah, the newsletter, of course, everything goes back to that group. Everything, that we would meet. It was a lifeline. It was a community. There was nothing out there. I've been asked by people, how was the trans poetry scene in the 80s? And I've said, what? What trans poetry scene?
No.
There's no such thing. There's really no such thing. So things are so different, but it goes back to that newsletter and that core group of people.
Okay. Thank you so much. Those are great stories. Kyla, you already spoke a little bit about how hard, or maybe I should say rare, it was to see somebody of your race in the publications, the very few publications that were out there for the trans community. And we know that the Trans Plus movement has not done a very good job on this. And I know that you founded the Trans People of Color Coalition. So one of the only organizations of its kind. And here's the logo of your organization. So to address this, so despite this overwhelming whiteness, what were some of the things that the FTM newsletter did well enough that you wanted to continue to subscribe and look forward to it arriving in the way that you talked about before? So if you could go into a little bit about what the value was to you as a Black person who rarely saw a Black face in this publication. How did you cope with that?
Well, I think it helped that I really am a rural boy. And I think that just made the difference. I grew up in rural America where it's predominantly white. So I could relate in a different way from somebody from a metropolitan area. I had always been the other. I mean, look at how light I am now. And these are sunburns from where I tried to make myself Black to fit in, and my story and history, which I don't want to go into a lot here because it's about the newsletter. So, but that made me able to always be with different groups of people. Like now I pass for everybody's nationality, and I don't mean I pass, but they assume I'm their nationality no matter what continent they're from. I mean, from an Ashkenazi Jew to people from South Africa, no matter what tribe they're from. And I have a lot of Native American in me, and clearly I have a lot of Caucasian in my blood. So that made me unique in that way, and that my parents were teachers of, you have to connect with people, and this is how you do it. And you treat all people with respect and dignity. And that's just the way I grew up, because people will meet me and they're like, why are you talking to me? They're their attendants in the bathroom and I'm talking to them. It's like, well, because I grew up, like Rupert said, I'm poor, I'm trans, I'm poor. Realistically, I had no idea, but we were poor when I was growing up, but our parents worked so hard that we didn't know we were poor until after we grew up, because we got everything we wanted to. We lived in a decent house and we had 2 automobiles. So, but that allowed me, and I have a real twang that you don't hear here, because I've learned how to modulate, because I work for a corporation and people think rural voices are not very bright. So I learned how to modulate to get rid of that twang. But as soon as I hit that county line, boy, that twang and all those sayings come back. So I know how to get along with people. And what it provided me was that sustenance that I had been missing all the way through my childhood, was that I was me, because I always have looked the same. So people ask me when I transitioned, and that's a hard question for me to answer, because I have always looked the same since I came out of my mother's womb. So I've had that, whatever you want to call it. You know, people have always called me a male child, and I was always treated as a male child because I looked like a male child. So when people ask me, when did you transition? That's a hard question for me to answer in my head, because, you know, I could never go to female restrooms, locker rooms, or any of those things. But what the FTM I provided me were connections with people that were like me. So that was a good foundation, you know, because all I had, fortunately, were two good parents that loved me unconditionally, unlike a lot of other people. So they did whatever they had to do to protect me from bad doctors, ugly people. And then I never fit into, back then, we want to call a binary. We were not this diverse in race in this country. So it was black or white. And I didn't fit into either of those paradigms either. So not only was I gender non-conforming, but I was race non-conforming. And my hair actually has gotten darker over the years, but it was pure white blonde at the time also. So I came out of the womb with pure white blonde hair. And so that allowed me to call Jameson my brother and my dear friend and lots of other people. So that made me connect, because that base had been missing. And, you know, I had looked through lots of literature and etc. to find that. And I could not find that, especially living. And when I came out, so many people came out. It was overwhelming, because they called me up on the phone asking, because I had to, you know, I was dumped from my corporate job, and they just asking, could they come see me, because they had been hoarded in their houses for decades on Social Security disability back in the day, for people that don't know that, just because they were trans. And so that's how they were living, because I chose to live differently. And again, because I had the familial base, but I also had reached out to FTMI International to get those other connections that allowed me to grow into a good adult and have the support I needed to keep living my life as I wanted to live.
Thank you, Kyler. All of you are telling so much from the heart that it's very moving. And I'm watching the chat, and I know that our audience is feeling that way as well.
And I just want to say, I should have said, and I got to see Max, you know, who touched me on there. I never told Max that. But, you know, I was like, oh, yeah, you know, and that was the closest color I saw to color. And Max just, and I'm telling you this now, but that just took to my heart, you know, and it was like, yeah, you know, I can do this also, you know, yeah. And it's like, and it was about around the same time when he was on in 98, when he was on the cover, etc. And I'm sorry, Aaron, I didn't mean to step on you, but I want to tell Max that. And that just brought such pride to me.
Oh, thank you. Thank you.
So, yeah. And that was life-saving, FTMI International, and then Max being on there. And that was life-saving at the time. So, thank you.
Oh, well, thank you. And I'm so happy to hear that. I really am. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. You know, this is so much illustrating the value of this newsletter for the connections and the inspiration and the sense of community in a time before the internet. You know, we divide the world up before the internet and since the internet. And when there was no internet, when travel was incredibly expensive, when long distance phone calls were incredibly expensive, we relied on things that came in the mail. We relied on paper to communicate with each other and to find that sense of connection when at that time, there may have been some other trans people in whatever communities we lived in, but you'd never know it. This is the only way you'd find them because everybody was deep stealth because it was too dangerous to be anything else. And you're all telling the stories that illustrate how this one small newsletter had such a wide net and built such a web. And so my final question, which is to all of you, is to talk a little bit about how things have changed. And if you see the connection to the FTM organization, to the FTM newsletter, make that connection as well about how much things have changed between then and now. So we got about 5 minutes, maybe a little bit more. So if each of you could just maybe take a minute or so to talk about what are some of the most significant, important changes that you have seen since that time till now. And if I may, throw in a few words about where you'd like to see us go.
I do think it was that deep net that FTMI threw that bridged us together, particularly as trans masculine people, because we just didn't have the visibility. We still don't, some people assume we do, but we don't. And I still hear the same thing from young trans masculine people that I experienced, which I think is utterly ridiculous. And I hid mine like Max did, like it was a Playboy magazine or whatever magazine, and my little article of Billy Tipton. And I think that was so important at the time when we couldn't make those long distance phone calls, etc. And most of us didn't make the income, and there are younger people that do, but we were not of that generation and still aren't to make money, and that there's a cutoff for that, that we just don't make the income because of who we were. We were women who became men, low paid women that became men that nobody wants to hire. And that's part of it at the time. And, we didn't gain the privileges that people assumed we were going to gain because we're trans masculine people. And once people find that out, I've not gained that masculine privilege, that people assume that you're going to gain because you're a 5'2" guy. And that just doesn't translate. So I do tie that to FTMI. There are still shades of difference within our community that I think we need to heal. We have the internet, we have all these things. I see generational barriers, and I've been on lots of generational panels, and it amazes me because this generation changed the way trans people were viewed. We're visible. And we long for visibility so we could have leaders to look up to and see. And now it's sort of like, we don't want to see old people. And it's like, well, first of all, I'm not old. I might be older, but no matter what's on my head or what it looks like, don't call me old. I may be older and I'm going to be young until the day I drop. Okay. And you don't get to frame me. And I see a lot of that going on. So I think we have to work cross-generationally to see that everybody is valued in this community, especially the people that paved the way and cut the brush down so that other people could have benefits that we never will get. And so I think that's important. Secondly, I think that brings us together, and we all need to stop. I hate using the word shade because everything's shade, because I'm just a realistic at it person, but hurting each other, because if we don't take care of each other, then we don't show other people how to treat us. And so if we're at each other saying, oh, Jameson's got more than I got, I hate Jameson, then how are other people going to treat us well? So we still have, and Rupert talked about, we had all those divides, but we still have all those divides. We still have cis. LGBT people hating on us. We have younger trans people hating on us. We have older trans people. There's so many divides in this community that it amazes me we still have those divides. And we need to stop it, because that's why other people can then hate on us, because they see us hating on each other. I have been personally beaten by young trans people for doing nothing but just advocating because they want my spot. And it's like, what spot? I'm definitely not wealthy and poorer than I've ever been in my lifetime, because you want my job that I earned and have gone to school for. And we need to lead our own movement is the third thing that I would say, because the gay people have slipped in, at least in the States, and they're running our movement. And we need to wake up to that. And it's like, should be a trans-led movement, and people don't like to discuss that. And that goes back to when we did lead with FTI and International and other things that we built that now seem accommodating when the money is flowing, and now gay people want that money to tell us what to do with it. So, and that is critical, I think, to the framework of how our movement should be led and will be successful, so we get the things that we need to continue on, to continue to fight these battles that are horrendous in the States. And I think we'll be successful. And I'm taking up too much time because I'm fired up. So with that, I will rest on those two things at least, because I can tell you a whole bunch more that we need to do. But those are, I think, three critical things. But I do think they tie back to the network of the good old days when we knew people and got to know people personally and didn't judge them, because social media is a good thing, but it's a bad thing in that we judge people immediately on my picture or what's seen on social media and take off with it. And when we had the smaller connections, we grew to know each other a bit better. So I'll stop now.
Thank you, Kyler. And there's a comment came in while you were talking that it says, Kyler, I'm enjoying your fire, an exclamation point. So I'm going to give some time to the folks who are watching and writing questions in the chat box. And I want to just take note that several people's names have been mentioned, and some of them are online. And I just want to acknowledge that some of the folks that we've been mentioning as helping to start all of this are here. Jude Patton is here with us today. Dallas Denny is here with us today. Kit Racklin is here with us. Lucas Walther is here. John Otto, and probably many others. Those are the ones that I noticed in going by, and names have been popping up. So Kit actually gave a comment and a question that I'm going to read out. The newsletter was an essential source of information when doing trans-positive research in the late 80s and early 90s. Jameson's writings on medical issues was the best material available on the subject. The newsletter also helped us to build community here in New York City by giving us a place to announce meetings. It was a major factor in the ability to gather people for the 1995 FTM Conference of the Americas. So perhaps you can speak to the role of the newsletter and the importance of that conference. That was a big deal. I was there as well. And Jameson, I'm sure you were there, and I don't remember if our other panelists were there or not. No, Kyler, no, you weren't there. No, Max was there. So Max or Jameson, maybe you could say a few words about what that conference was for the people that were not there and what its importance was.
Excuse me, the FTM 1995 conference.
The one in LA.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
No, the one in San Francisco.
The one in San Francisco, yeah.
Sorry. No, so I don't think I was at the one in San Francisco. I was at the one in LA. That's one I was thinking.
That was the second one.
Okay, was
Yeah.
that?
No, that was the third one.
That was like the third one. Yeah.
Yeah, that was the third one.
Okay, I don't think I was at that one. But anyway,
First one, 1995.
Yeah.
Go, Max.
Oh, gosh. It was, of course, groundbreaking. What can I say? Lauren Cameron had a big part in that. And Lauren, it's too bad Lauren's not around for this panel.
I know.
You know, I'm not sure where he is. But he had done his exhibit of photographs of trans men, which was also groundbreaking at the time, and it had been in a local gallery in San Francisco. Very well attended, well publicized throughout the city. and he was an active part of that. I remember that was a big deal at the time. That was huge. Right. And somebody said something about non-binary. They were asking about non-binary. Well, of course, we kind of called non-binary cross-dressers. There were active cross-dressers like Francis. I mean, it wasn't non-binary, but it was like nobody says cross-dressers anymore.
Right.
But they, there was some place in there there were people who came to the group, not very many, but there were a couple who were very identified as, I am a female to male cross dresser, and I like to dress up in men's clothes, and I have a male persona, I paste on a mustache, but I am not actually a man. I have a male side, right? And so there were people like that. And I remember at the FTM conference, I'll remember this, there was an individual who took it a step further. And this person was dressed up. They had never taken hormones or surgery or anything, had no intention to. And they were dressed up in female clothes and, all decked out, looked great, looked really good. And they were a drag queen. So there were people starting to do things like that. I remember that. I won't name this person. They probably wouldn't mind, but, I don't have permission. So, so there were people doing things like this that were, we didn't call it non-binary, we didn't call it genderqueer. And then there was the no ho, no op. Around 95, I think, that's when that started appearing, where people would be like, I'm not going to take hormones, I'm not going to have any operations, I'm not even going to change my name, but I'm a man, right? So I think they would say they had a male identity. It wasn't so much I'm non-binary. Most of these people, not all of them, but many of them have moved into transitioning and medically, and they've, become men, but trans men. But at the time, they were kind of in that in-between space. So people were experimenting with that. It's interesting that cross-dresser is no longer a thing. And I guess, we've mentioned the cross-dressing organization for male to females, and that was the ETVC, the Educational Transvestite Network, right?
Yep.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. And I went to a meeting there once just to check it out. And it was basically, they were still male identified essentially, but they had a female persona. They were married to women. Their wives were usually there. So it was interesting. And there was a tension between the communities of transsexuals and transvestites. Just as I think there was we were really friendly. We were a small group, right? At FTMI, we didn't have anything against the people who were doing the in-between, but there's always a little tension, I think,
Well, there was at a time, I remember coming back from some conference I'd gone to. I think it was the first, one of Phyllis Fry's legal conferences down in Texas. I went down there and I came back to an FTM meeting and found out that a bunch of guys had decided that we were all too gay and they were going to go to San Jose and start a straight identified, trans man's group. Because,
I think I remember that. I remember that. Oh my God.
That is bizarre. That is totally bizarre. Our group was very, very open. We did not have, people didn't have to meet any criteria at all, except, be respectful.
Yeah.
That was the basic thing. And I think, and that's why we had so much diversity, I think.
Yeah.
And a lot of people were very uncomfortable with that diversity.
Yeah, I guess that's true. Well, I was surprised when I read that, but yeah, some people were. And then there were also complaints. It's in the newsletter. I was looking at some issues last night, and there were complaints about that there were too many lesbians. Yes. That it was becoming too lesbian, because I think this was a phenomena that was happening, which is very interesting historically, of people coming out of the lesbian community around the time that Jameson and I and Lauren and others were transitioned. And historically, it had not so much been that way, or they weren't, or it was different. And I can't quite put my finger on how it was different, but I know that I went to my first FTM meeting in 88, and I looked around and I asked the guys, I would go up and ask them, I hadn't started yet. I was checking it out. And I said, were any of you lesbians? They were like, no way. And I'm like, oh my God, like, what were they?
They were lying.
Yeah,
they were lying.
They're probably lying.
They were.
Probably lying.
Because I remember that time period, and there were tons of lesbians that they came into the trans movement. So
yeah. So I found Lauren, and Lauren was the first person who said, I was a lesbian separatist for 10 years. So I was
Yeah.
like, okay, I can talk to this person because I want to know, how can I get out of this lesbian thing? Like, can I escape? You know, it's not going to be easy because it's very, it's a huge community. It's a huge thing. It's a mindset, everything else, the culture. Yeah. But I already had one foot out the door because I've been a punk and an artist in communities outside the lesbian world. But
so I'm going to have to
but anyway,
bring this to a close because we're just about out of time. And the thing that I want to emphasize the most out of this last part of the conversation was the openness that FTMI had to a wide range of expressions. It was a big tent or a big umbrella. And I think that was one of its real strengths and one of the reasons it was successful. So I've seen some discussion going by in the chat about whatever happened to it. There is a website for FTMI that last time I looked didn't seem to be alive, but somebody said that they thought there had been something added recently. So folks out there, if you want to check that out, there is that. We've put by in the chat a whole bunch of links to a variety of things that we have through the Transgender Archives of the Chair in Transgender Studies. And I want to thank our panelists. This has been really a great discussion. And obviously we could go on for a lot longer. And I hope we have another opportunity to do that. Maybe you'll all come to the next Moving Trans History Forward conference and we can have a good time there together. And I also want to thank the folks behind the scenes. Michael, Jay, Eve, and UVic Libraries for supporting us in all of this. UVic Libraries is where the newsletter is posted. Now, I also want to remind you the Chair in Transgender Studies does all kinds of events and programming throughout the year in support of trans plus people and our allies, people who are searching for information and community here and now, and also looking to understand our history, have lots of history. If you like what we do, please support us and to help us to continue doing this important work. And there's images going by on your screen. You can point your phone at the QR code or go to the link and donate, because contrary to what many people think, the Chair in Transgender Studies is not an endowed chair. Our survival depends on donations from you and the goodwill of UVic. So if you can donate, great. If not, tell somebody you know who has money that they should donate, because I know lots of us don't have the money to donate ourselves. But please help to support us and sign up for our newsletter, use our social media, and please join us for the next Moving Trans History Forward conference, which is a year from now. So thank you all. Thank you to our panelists. Thank you to the folks that helped make this happen. Thank you to all of you out there who have attended, and so many of you who have contributed to bringing us to this day. We have a lot of longtime activists on this call, and I thank all of you as well.